Okay, we are live.
Welcome everyone to tonight's second virtual town hall meeting, and thank you for joining us. I'm John O'Brien, a 30-year resident of the district and a proud papa of two granddaughters in the Chagrin schools, and also a lay member of the school board's finance committee. The first part of this evening's meeting is again focused on the upcoming November 3rd general election, in which the district has brought a 3.85 operating levy forward for consideration by the community. The new operating levy will not increase the millage on your real estate bill nor your property taxes, because the 1997 capital levy to build the middle school will expire in December of this year, and it was effectively 3.85 mils. The second part of this evening's meeting will also include a brief update on the consideration of the possibility of a full day return to school for students. You might have already seen the email update that went out at 4:45 this afternoon. I would now like to turn the meeting over to District Superintendent Dr. Robert Hunt.
Thank you, John. Thank you for being here and helping us facilitate this evening. Just want to make sure everyone can see the PowerPoint okay? Good. We certainly appreciate those tuning in at home, and obviously we'll record this to share with our community. This evening we will take you through a presentation introducing you to the November 3rd ballot issue, the 3.85 operating issue that Mr. O'Brien discussed. We'll have a question and answer session facilitated by Mr. O'Brien. Some have already submitted questions in advance. If you do have questions as we're going, you can continue to submit those. So if you see the email address at the bottom, the last bullet point here, it says questions@chagrinschools.org. And if you also look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that as we've included it on every slide throughout the presentation. So feel free to submit any questions that you have. We will pause after the levy specific presentation, do the questions specific to that area, and then I'll address kind of full day district reopening, followed by whatever questions you have specific to that issue as well. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll walk through this. Really our goal this evening is to explain to you why public school districts in Ohio rely so heavily on their local communities to support their work, provide a brief overview of how the district is performing academically, demonstrate why we believe this is the most fiscally responsible solution, and then again answer any questions that you might have. Obviously, this is a very difficult and unique time with the pandemic, and we really believe this is about sustaining what we offer as a school district. You know, we continue to prepare and deal with the daily crisis at hand, but we also want to continue to retain and sustain all the things that we're able to offer to students. As previously mentioned, this will not increase the tax bill of our local residents, and we'll walk you through why that is. So just a little bit of a brief historical perspective. In 2017, the district passed an 8.9 mil operating and bond issue. 5.5 of that was for operations, and 3.4 of that was bond. The bond, a significant amount of the bond issue went to the renovation and new construction of the Chagrin Falls Intermediate School, in which we were able to open on time and under budget, extending the projects that we were able to accomplish with that bond issue, including every building in the school district. So things like new entryways, safe and secure entryways at the high school and Gurney Elementary, additional roofing and paving work throughout the district. The 5.5 operational side we had committed that we would be off the ballot for at least 3 years. So obviously that would have taken us to March of 2017. And, obviously March was an interesting time in our world and our country as the arrival of the pandemic came, and we saw pressure in reduction of our state funding. So really last fall, we started working with our finance committee, of which Mr. O'Brien's a member of, led by Mrs. Brudno, and our Board of Education on what the right ask for the community would be. And we were tracking or moving towards a 7.9 mil operating levy to be on in November or this upcoming spring. Obviously, due to the economic impact and uncertainty of COVID, we made a decision that we needed to go back to the drawing board. So at this point, we've made some reductions, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but the district is asking for a 3.85 mil that would not increase the amount of taxes currently paid by residents. So how is that possible? If you think about kind of two buckets, there's a debt payment bucket. When we take a bond issue, we take on debt and we pay that debt back over time. So in 1997, the district passed a bond issue to build what is now Chagrin Falls Middle School. We refinanced those bonds in 2012, and that debt payment will be complete in December of 2020. So as a result of paying off that debt, it currently is about 3.85 mils. We're asking that our community approve taking that 3.85 mils that was kind of going to debt and moving that over to operations. So that is how this will not increase the tax payment of our residents in the schools. And it certainly can be confusing, especially if you look at the ballot language, and probably one of our biggest challenges. The ballot language basically begins with, this is an additional tax. So it is additional millage that we are asking for operations. However, what this ballot language does not say is the same amount of millage is falling off or no longer will be collected for a debt payment, basically making this a flat tax ask for our community. Ashley?
So these are images from the actual resolutions that we pass every year. We have to pass a resolution explaining or detailing the millage that we are collecting. So these are taken directly from there, and the second one on my screen is covered. I don't know if you could move that, Bob, or maybe you can see it. But the one from 2019, which was to be collected in 20, which is what was collected this year, you can see circled in red there is the millage that's collected for bonds, and we collected 8.15 mils this year. The tax budget for next year, which is on tax valuations for this year to be collected next year, you can see right there it's 4.3. That is the actual millage that is collected. House Bill 920, which I'll explain in a little further detail in a couple slides here, does not affect that. That 111.45 mils there outside millage on the general fund, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about House Bill 920. So I know there's been some confusion, and I've gotten some questions about how the 3.85 mils is actually coming off, and if it's based on 1997 values. It is not. The 8.15 is what was actually collected. That was the effective millage collected last year, or collected this year and collected next year. Right now, we are set to collect 4.3. So what we're asking for is moving that difference of 3.85 mils down to that next line into the operating millage, and House Bill 920 then will apply going forward if successful and it becomes operating millage. So House Bill 920 is legislation that was passed in 1976 when inflation was high, and the goal was so that taxpayers didn't get an increase on their taxes without voting on it. So as your property valuations went up, they didn't want the taxes to go up with them. So that's what House Bill 920 does. It freezes the amount that we collect on any levy to the dollar amount that was collected in the year that we passed that levy. So to illustrate, I have this example here. If we passed a levy in 1990 and it collected $100, just to be simple around easy numbers, The same levy today would still only generate $100. And with inflation, obviously, that $100 does not buy today what it did 30 years ago. Our expenditures do tend to go up with inflation. We do everything we can. I think we do a great job here at this district of looking for efficiencies wherever possible and controlling costs. But, like any business or any household, expenditures do increase over time with inflation. So as our expenditures increase slowly, our revenue needs to somehow catch up. And so that's where we get this levy cycle in which every school district in the state of Ohio ends up having to go back to our taxpayers periodically. So if you're a visual person, this is a visual to try to explain House Bill 920 and how it works. That green line there is the expenses, and those do slowly go up over time. And our revenues, when we pass a levy, we increase our revenue, and then it stays flat for several years. Then we pass another levy, and our revenue will jump up, and that's how you get this stair-stepping effect on the revenue. And we have to continually pass levies to keep up with the expenses. So this is just another picture of what House Bill 920 does. So this is showing Class 1 effective millage versus voted millage. The Class 1 is our residential taxpayers, which is the majority of our tax base here in Chagrin. We don't have a whole lot of industry and business. So I'm showing Class 1 here. The blue bars there are the effective millage, and the gray is essentially what's lost in millage. So if you look at the top part, the total bar, the bar in total is the voted mills. So that's what voters have approved. And then the colored portions of those bars are what we're actually collecting. So as the years go by and the county continues to reduce the millage, resulting in that effective millage, you can see how much we've lost there. So when you talk voted mills, you can see our voted mills are much higher than our effective mills than we're actually collecting. So 79% of our revenue last year came from our real estate property tax. There's kind of an understanding, or there's a misunderstanding in the state of Ohio that schools are funded by the state. And in our case, if you look at this pie chart here, that green portion of the pie there that says unrestricted state aid, that's our foundation from the state of Ohio. So only 4% of our revenue actually comes from the state. So we're very reliant on our property taxes. This is showing all of the schools in Cuyahoga and Geauga. Again, that's the schools that we're comparing to throughout most of these slides. The actual amount per student that we get from the state. So you can see that local average is the green bar. That's the average of all of the schools in Geauga and Cuyahoga. And then we're that orange bar there, obviously. So you can see how little we actually get from the state. So that 4% that I showed you on the pie chart is represented there in that orange bar. So you can see we don't get a whole lot from the state. And part of that is because of our perceived wealth in the state, their calculation and how they determine how much each school gets is based on property values, and there's an income portion of that calculation as well. So we're definitely at the lower end of what schools receive from the state. So how is our money spent? You can see 76%, that blue and the red is our employees. That's our salaries, wages, benefits. We're a people business. All schools are. That's how we educate our students. That's what we do is with our people. So that 76% is something we want to be transparent about. And I'm confident in that percentage. That is not out of whack. It is consistent with other schools in the state of Ohio. We get a lot of people who tend to want to say, in order to fix your budget or, fix the mismatch with your revenue and your expenditure, why don't you cut your supplies and cut your equipment and stop buying things? If you look at those two smallest pieces of the pie there, the capital outlay, that's equipment in the general fund, and then the 2% is the supplies, that purple. So you can see only 3% of our budget is represented by those items. So as much as we do everything we can to keep those expenditures under control and keep them as low as possible. But, you know, it doesn't affect the bottom line significantly. So this is a picture of what's projected right now. The blue is revenue, the orange is expenditures, and you can see as the years go by, if our revenue remains flat and our expenditures slowly increase, our expenditures are going to outpace our revenue. What happens when you're spending more than you're bringing in, obviously, is your cash starts to deplete. That's the green line there, and you can see it start to plummet. The red line there is our cash balance policy. We have a policy that states that we will try to maintain at a bare minimum 2 months worth of operating expenditures. I think best practice is probably about twice that. Best practice is probably closer to 10 for us, but just to show you where policy would be, we really can't get below that. But as you can see right now, we're projected to dip below that. So this just plops in that yellow line there. It's the exact same chart as the previous slide. The yellow is if the 3.85 mils is successful. So what that will do is bring it from the bond. Right now, or this year, taxpayers were paying it up for bond retirement. If they were to move that and start paying it for operating, that would put it into the general fund and increase our revenues in our general fund, and then take us a little further out. So you can see, you know, that buys us the 3 years that we're committing to.
So Ashley did a really good job kind of explaining our, you know, the limitations of House Bill 920 in terms of it freezing our revenue, kind of forcing us back to the community, looking at our expenses and our revenue in terms of what comes from the state of Ohio. It certainly makes the point that, you know, is our local residential property taxpayer that carries our district. That's a little bit of our plight. We have very little or no industry. Therefore, it's always on our local residential taxpayer. There's a couple of ways that, you know, people or communities can kind of judge spending in terms of comparisons district to district. One of them is to look at average teacher salary. And again, we've lined up all of Cuyahoga and Geauga County schools. We've shown you what the local average is and pointed out where we fall from a Sugar and Falls average teacher salary perspective. Another way is to look at per pupil expenditure. So how much are you spending per pupil? Again, all of the districts lined up. Green is the local average, and you can see that we fall kind of right in the middle of that. And the last one is a look at kind of administrative costs per pupil, and the local average, I think, again, we fall on the right side of that average. So looking at costs and comparing to other districts, and then considering kind of our results and return, I think we demonstrate that we certainly get a lot for the expenses that we pay for our school district. And we didn't approach or get down to going from 7.9, bringing to 3.85 simply by kind of shortening the length of the term of this. We have made recommendations to implement about $1.2 million in reductions over this year and next year that are necessary for us to be able to get to the committed 3 years of this levy cycle for the school district. So this is a list of those items. We also believe it's our responsibility to do everything we can to seek outside funding and keep the pressure as much as we possibly can away from our local residents. And these are a list of grants that we've obtained, you know, fairly recently that have a significant impact on what we do in our school district, certainly, but also offset costs of things that we potentially would have had to include in our general fund. For example, that straight A grant, that was a lot of infrastructure in terms of technology that would have had to been done to go in to get one-to-one. So we were able to get a grant to do that. If you look at the Ohio Cultural Facilities Grant, you remember we worked with our local legislators and got into the capital budget, offsetting about $600,000 of the renovation and new construction at Sugar Falls Intermediate School. So we work very hard to find opportunities and find ways to support the things that we want to do for kids outside of approaching our local taxpayers. And certainly a large part of that comes from the continuous support of our support organizations. They work very, very hard to provide and assist our school district as well. Again, kind of cost avoidance on our local residential property taxpayers. So we've talked about the costs a little bit. We want to share a little bit about kind of the return on investment for our community members. And in looking at that, Ashley put together, I think, a real nice chart that looks at expenses and performance. Ashley, if you want to cover that.
Sure. So this is a chart that actually ODE prepares on their website with all 612 districts, or 10 or 11, however many schools there are now, in the whole state of Ohio. And I thought it was a really good idea, but we kind of got lost in the mix when it was the whole state. So I pulled out just those Cuyahoga and Geauga schools that we like to compare ourselves to. And every dot there on this chart is one of those schools. Obviously, we're the orange one. So you can see going up, that's your performance index score. And, we know we're at the top there. We're the third in the state. But we are not at the top when we're talking expenditures. We showed you the bar chart several slides ago that showed that we are below average in what we spend. So, we're getting top performance, but not spending top dollar.
So looking at kind of academic achievement, and I'm not going to share all of the information on these next couple of slides, but if referencing a few of the metrics we use, we obviously look at state report card results. We don't ever want to be that district that singly focuses on a test score, but this is one metric in which we can evaluate how we're doing and how we're improving. So if you go back actually the last 5 years, you would see consistent improvement in our district report card. I would point to that top line that says district PI. That stands for District Performance Index, and that score is really a culmination of all of the testing that happens in grades 3 through 8 and end of course exams at the high school. And if you kind of follow that across the top, you'll see that it's steadily been increasing over the last 3 years. In 19 was obviously the last time we had a report card because there was not state testing last year due to COVID. But in those rankings, we ranked number 3 in the state of Ohio, and our Sugar Falls High School was the highest scoring high school on the end of course exams in terms of their performance. Additionally, we're one of only 4 districts to receive the overall A in terms of the ranking in the state report card. And we've continued to be able to increase our AP offerings, currently up to 28. But also increase the amount of access. So the number of students that are actually accessing and taking these courses is dramatically increasing as well. What's nice about that is as more students take these courses, you would think that might impact kind of end results. We've steadily held over an 80% 3 or higher score on our AP exam. So on the results side, they've consistently held true as well. Also added AP capstone and AP research and seminar, one of the first districts in the state of Ohio to do that. And last year we graduated 14 students with AP capstone diploma, which is similar to an IB diploma, or at least AP's version of that. I'm not going to read the college entrance scores along the bottom. Those have also improved, and as you can see, when compared to state or national averages, we continue to perform very, very well. Our class of 2020, much like their predecessors, went off to very impressive list of colleges and universities, and that trend continues with over 94%, almost 95% of our students going to 4-year universities. In terms of accolades, we've just included some on the next couple of slides. I won't read them to you, maybe just highlight a few. First one is Carolyn Petit, the Presidential Award in Excellence in Mathematics and Science and Teaching. And my over 20 years in education, I've never been in a district or even seen one of these given to a local teacher. She's one of 2 teachers in the state of Ohio to receive that award, obviously 50 in the nation. Also would point out to Sasha and Maggie's National Speech and Debate Public Forum Championship. One of the most exciting things I've ever watched, quite honestly. And I think beyond just their achievement, that program specifically in terms of the numbers and the amount that they grow as young people in that program is certainly a success story as well. I mentioned the All A, one of 4 school districts in the state of Ohio, continuous growth with the Momentum Award, and continuing to improve our rankings from U.S. News and World Report, as well as additional accolades for reporting and fiscal to just achieving and going after competitive grants to improve the things that we offer to our students here in the school district. So if this kind of boils down, we're asking for a 3.85 mil operating levy that will not increase the taxes. Ashley did a really good job explaining why that is. We're essentially paying off bond or debt that will equate to 3.85. And we're asking to move that over to the operations side. It's certainly critical for us to maintain and sustain what we're currently offering. As we mentioned, we've already made pretty significant cuts and want to continue to offer the programming levels that we currently have. If the levy fails, we certainly will be in the conversations around 7.9, which all would be additional money and increased taxes. And that would have to come with some level of reductions. Now, that's a conversation for us we would have to have with our Board of Education, but that just gives you kind of an idea of what we would need to continue to sustain our currently offerings if we had to come back in the spring of this year. So there's just a link for absentee ballots. I think at this time, Mr. O'Brien, if you turn it over to you to ask whatever questions have been submitted. And just a reminder, if you do have a question, go ahead and email it to questions@chagrinschools.org. And let's address kind of the financial side before we jump into reopening.
Thank you, Bob. There are 3 questions on the levy. The first is a series of assertions and then a couple of questions. So it starts off, in a recent school board meeting, a member mentioned catastrophic cuts, then softened the language. You got a huge tax levy passed in 2017. The cuts you made should be the way you always operate. Run lean, cut administrative costs. Too much for the size of our district. But you can always go back to the taxpayers. What if this were a low-income community? What would you do then? The meeting also discussed trying to pass a second half of this levy later, once the COVID calms down. Why?
Maybe I'll deal with the end of that first, and we'll work our way back into it. I'm not sure what is being referenced in terms of a second half of a levy. So there's not a part 2 of this levy coming in the spring. We have had conversations. If we fail, we could potentially be back on in the spring. The only other thing we have talked about in the future is we are committing to stay off of the ballot, that this would last us for at least 3 years. So those are the, 2 responses there. Maybe I'll just address one other piece of, I think we've shared our spending and how it compares to other school districts, both looking at per pupil, administrative, and teacher salary, and we fall below average in all 3 of those, benchmarks and comparisons. Ashley, I don't know if you want to jump in on anything else.
No, there were quite a few questions in there. So, John, if we're missing something, let me know. I tried to jot some things down as you were talking, but the last part about this, the going back for the second half of the levy, I don't know if that is maybe referring to the fact that in the spring, when we were talking about 7.9, we were expecting it to last 4 years, potentially 5, and now we're only committing to 3. that is, again, just a response on our part to the environment that we're in and that COVID created, to try to keep that millage down. Part of it was making cuts as well as shortening that levy cycle. As far as, needing to operate lean always, certainly we all agree. And I would argue that we do a great job, as evidenced, by all of the comparisons to all of our surrounding school districts. Catastrophic cuts, I don't know what portion of the last board meeting that this person is referring to, but $1.2 million over the next 2 years is, we did everything we could to keep those cuts out of the classroom. If we have to make more, obviously the more cuts that we have to make, the harder they get. So, yes, we're always looking for efficiencies. We're always doing our part. We're always looking for ways to control costs, and taking advantage of everything we can. We were, part of the reason that we were able to come up with those cuts so quickly is because we were already in the process of coming up with lists of cuts, to, kind of keep us going and, looking for areas of efficiency always. So we were already in that process before COVID hit. We just had to expand it to get to the 1.2 to get us down to the 3.85 mils, which was a very thoughtful, number that we wanted to get to, because that is what is dropping off.
Thank you, Bob. I think you did cover it all.
Okay.
The second question, Ashley, you covered on the HB 920 presentation, but maybe just to reinforce it all, go ahead and read it anyhow. Okay. You note that the HB 920, House Bill 920, reduces the millage on voted mills to keep the dollar amount the same, resulting in an effective millage that is less than the voted mills. And that was the graph you showed with the orange and the gray, the nominal or elected, and then the effective rate. So would a new levy for 3.85 mils cost more than the 3.85 mil cost when the bond was passed? Wouldn't that make it an increase? What is the current effective millage of the 3.8 mils that is falling off?
Okay. So House Bill 920 applies to the voted operating mills. So that 111 mills that I showed you on the tax rate resolutions, that's where that is applied. So what the county does is they calculate a reduction factor, and that reduction factor gets applied to the voted outside millage. So it doesn't get applied to the inside millage, and it doesn't get applied to bonds. So the bonds fluctuate from year to year, because when you pass a bond, you don't pass it for a specific millage amount. There's a millage on the ballot language, but that's an average millage that the county fiscal officer has determined is going to be needed to pay off that debt. So what the voters are actually approving when they approve a bond is millage enough to cover payments for every year. So that millage fluctuates slightly from year to year. What is coming off from last year from what was collected this year to what is planned on being collected next year, the difference is 3.85 mils. So it's not based on the 1997 values when this bond, I honestly don't even know what the exact millage was that appeared on the language or on the ballot language from 1997. I can guarantee it wasn't 3.85 exactly. But that's what is being collected right now. That's what we're reducing the millage by going into next year. So the millage, should this not pass, is going down by 3.85 mils.
Thank you, Ashley. The third question, and by the way, a fourth one has arrived while we've been talking. The third question is, if the levy does not pass, will my tax bill decrease?
Yes. Yes. Because those 3.85 mils will be coming off. So your tax bill would decrease. That's why, we did put so much work into trying to get to that 3.85 to keep it on an even on, just to keep it flat so that it wasn't an increase to taxpayers, but still float us, 3 years, get us out and away from, this current environment that we're facing.
Without trying to be cute, I think the answer would be yes, but.
Yes.
The fourth question is, if we only need 3.85 mils for 3 years of operation before another shortfall, why would you need 7.9 mils in the spring if this doesn't pass? Or if this passes, will you be asking for another 4 mils in the spring?
No, if this passes, we will not be asking for additional millage in the spring. We are committed to making this last 3 years. Why would we need to go up to a 7.9? As we go into another year, I realize the spring isn't a full year away from November. However, taxes are collected on a calendar year basis. So if we don't pass this in November, we lose an entire year's worth of collection by going to the spring. So it just makes that shortfall, that deficit, and the hole that we're trying to fill that much larger. So we would need, the longer you wait, the more millage you need.
Thank you. That concludes the levy questions, and now we'll turn to the educational model or full-time students, and I'll turn that over to Bob and Ashley and Jennifer Benko, our Director of Pupil Services.
John, thank you so much for being here tonight. And those that are watching, if you do have a finance question, continue to go ahead and submit it at questions@chagrinschools.org as I go through this the next couple of slides. Obviously, this has been a very challenging situation for everyone personally and professionally, and that applies to us at schools as we try to navigate the waters and do what we think is best for our students and our staff from a safety and wellness standpoint, as well as an educational standpoint. When we went to a hybrid model, we committed that we would continue to monitor data. We would really focus on putting the necessary cleaning and sanitation requirements in place and protocols in place, and continue to modify or monitor data in terms of potential next steps. And on Friday of this week, or Friday of last week, we released an email to begin the process to look at the potential of returning for a full day with all of our students in that chose and wanted to be in. I think I made it pretty clear in the email. This wasn't an announcement of a return. It was an announcement of we need to start to gather data and information so we are ready and prepared to open in a way that you would expect us to open, very efficiently and effectively and seamlessly, as we've tried to do with re-entering in a hybrid model. So I do want to just, I guess, talk about a few things and point out information that has been shared really over the last couple of months and certainly at board meetings. But we have developed specific items and matrix that we evaluate on a weekly basis and look at trends over time that will drive this decision. And this is just a clip of the district dashboard. You can access this on our main webpage. If you click on our main webpage, you get to this dashboard, and then you can go ahead and actually click on the dashboard, and it will take you to the various categories that are in the model and the data that we're collecting and monitoring every single week. So for every component on here, health and safety, staff attendance, student attendance, Ohio Public Health Advisory System, and our cases are all shared with you in this information. So attempting to be as transparent as we can. We are very, very pleased at the data from the first 4 weeks of school. We did get the question, it's only 4 weeks. Why would you consider this? It is 4 weeks, and the step we're taking is really about planning and preparing not necessarily making the decision to return fully at this point. So in looking at how we're going to approach the process in terms of when we return to full-time, it's unfortunate. I would love to be able to do a lot of the work in preparation behind the scenes and just be prepared and announce we're transitioning and we'll see you all on Monday. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way. This really all starts with us understanding who is interested, who would want to be in school all day, every day, assuming that our data continues to, demonstrate in a way that it currently has. And we need to know who is not comfortable and wants to remain in a hybrid model. That information drives everything else. So it has to be the first step in this process. So that is what we, I guess, launched and started on Friday of last week. With that, the next piece of that would be to establish a tentative timeline, go then through, because we then have the data, planning of the full day reopening and what that would look like, and then a final announcement of when that specific date would be. So we're really at the point just at the beginning of this process, and that is collecting data from our parents. Please notice the kind of the arrow that goes across the entire top is we will on a weekly basis continue to monitor the district dashboard. If there's significant changes in that dashboard, we will react appropriately. What does that mean? Or give me examples. If we were in the state advisory system, for example, where Cuyahoga County is currently orange, Geauga County is currently yellow. If we were to see both of those move in the other direction and go into red, we would not bring all students back in. We'd continue in our hybrid model, and potentially if it continued to rise and it got towards purple, start considering a remote. So we're asking our parents to look at the data over the first 4 weeks, assume that data were to continue to hold true, and then make a decision based on that. We are not going to recommend and move towards a full day reopening if that data doesn't consistently hold true. If it changes, we will react appropriately. So more specifically in the area of the kind of the full day, that purple section there, what planning has to happen, just to give you perspective that this isn't just kind of flipping on a switch. Once we understand how many students we would have interested in virtual and how many students we would have in full day, we then need to go through the process of evaluating the schedule with our current staff. We have some issues with our current schedule. For example, Excel Tech at the high school, length of time in the midday at the high school or the 712 campus. So we want to evaluate the current schedule, and certainly if we're going to make a change and make an adjustment. We've been in the process of conducting site visits. So I've asked our director of operations to go out to school districts that are currently all in and evaluate their sites. Use it as an opportunity to learn, or the things that we're doing that are happening that we should be considering that we need to implement here. Are our current practices enough? So those site visits are ongoing currently right now. We'd have to revise the K-6 master schedule based on enrollment. Obviously, if we have a higher percentage of students in virtual academy or the Chagrin Virtual Academy, we would need more staffing. If we have less students in that model and more students coming to school, we need to staff the in-person learning. So again, those numbers drive what that will look like. The same process happens at the 7-12 master schedule. For example, we've heard some feedback from teachers that, if I have a lot of virtual students and a lot of kids in the classroom, a longer block is better because I need the time at the beginning to take attendance, check in on those kids, make sure we're okay. However, if I have no students or a few students in that virtual, maybe a 45-minute or 50-minute schedule that's more traditional makes sense. So this allows us to work with staff, look at the data, and make those, develop those student schedules. The configuration of classrooms and furniture, we believe we can turn the district over in about a week. So we've always operated under that premise that we could turn the district over once we feel like the data's there, we've done our due diligence, the schedules are ready, we could turn everything over within a week. And then obviously the other piece of this is develop transportation routes, arrival and dismissal procedures. I want to commend and thank all of our parents. We put it out on all call to please drive if you could. And as you always do, you answered. In fact, we have too many people driving, and we have traffic concerns on Bell Road and Philomathian for our elementary runs. So we actually, in the survey that we received on Friday, we asked those that were comfortable to commit to transporting. That will help us be able to move forward with a full day reopening. So I guess I describe this as potentially it's certainly not the beginning of the end, but maybe it's kind of the end of the beginning. If you look at our school year and where we might be, the next step in this is to gather data and for us to do the work to be prepared that if our current environment holds true and our current trends hold true, that we move forward with a full day option. So I sent out an email this afternoon to provide some more direct, timelines for people. We're obviously asking parents to commit by October 16th. So we pushed back that original date, give parents a little more time to think about this. Once we have that data, we'll go through all the work that I just described between October 16th and November 1st. And then if everything continues to hold true, all of that work is done. At the earliest we would be ready to announce a return date for all students is November 1st. Likely that would tie more with the end of a trimester, but I think at that point we would be ready to kind of make an announcement and identify a specific date. So I know that there's uneasiness, concern with some when the email arrived. Again, it's not an announcement of a return. It's an announcement of we feel it's appropriate based on the data as we see it over the first 4 weeks for us to do the necessary work so we can be prepared to return. So I just wanted to spend a few minutes there this evening addressing that. Jen, I want to open it up to see if any questions came in that I need to respond to or I can respond to.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start with talking about the current hybrid model. The hybrid model has been working very well for my son and our family. Even with the ability to go to full days, is there any consideration of making the hybrid model a permanent model?
I guess my answer to would be no. We're looking at the potential of bringing all students in with this work. If we need to retain the hybrid model, if because of data, because of concern, because of the factors that I discussed, we would just stay in the hybrid model moving forward. Unfortunately, it's like almost every other decision we've been forced with. There are people that really like the hybrid model and there are people that really hate the hybrid model, and everyone in between. So we're using this model as long as we feel like it's most appropriate, and we would transition if the data and the trends that we talked about to bring all of our students back.
Okay, now I'm going to ask a couple of questions, but I'm going to kind of group them by building a little bit. So first, looking at the middle school and high school current situation, given a return to all in, can you share more information as to the need for virtual Fridays?
Yeah, and that's I met with staff this afternoon. We did a full call, and I've put very few parameters around the schedules for our building administrators once we have the data. One of the parameters is that we retain a virtual day. And the reason for that is if we have to transition to a remote environment, we are very well prepared to do that better than we were last March. It keeps all of our students and our staff interacting in the environment and prepared if that is necessary. And honestly, that's also the environment that, even in normal time, they're going to see a blended environment in university. So I believe there's some benefit to experiencing that here as well.
Okay, and Bob, has a final decision been made yet as to which day for middle school and or high school the virtual day will be?
I haven't dug into that conversation to see if there's even an interest in moving it. I know it's currently Friday, so as far as I know, that would be the day. But there may be very good reasons that they choose to switch that. And again, I don't want to limit the team in that conversation. But we certainly will roll all of this out with plenty of time and notice prior to kind of coming back.
Okay, moving on to the intermediate school. How will my child's day change if he were to go to school full day? How will it change if he remains virtual while other students return for a full day?
So probably the biggest change, and Jen, you know this as well as I, or maybe better, so you feel free to jump in here. From a virtual environment, they're currently being taught science and social studies virtually by 1 or 2 teachers. They would move to more of a live streaming of science and social studies in regular classrooms. So various teachers would have to pick up that content. I think that's the most significant change in the intermediate school.
Yeah, I would just add that the students that are staying virtual at the intermediate school will have a very similar experience to what they're having now. They're going to be live streamed into their classes. Okay, will encores be taught live? Will in-person and virtual students still be taught together at the intermediate school, or will you be switching to an all virtual class? And I think we kind of just touched on that a little bit. One of the things that we've talked about is whether or not we are able to designate staff to teaching the all virtual kids to kind of eliminate that live streaming format, because it can be difficult. We haven't made final decisions on that. We need the numbers of students in each model, and then we're going to take a look at it. If we can dedicate teachers, we're going to definitely consider that. But it may be that we need to continue the live streaming model that we currently have. As far as encore classes, we are looking at the intermediate school, we're still going back and forth between live streaming kids in for those encore classes or having the encore teachers push out content to those students. So that decision hasn't totally been made yet at this point.
Yeah, and I think I would like to reiterate, and I'd almost take us back to, early August when we were making the decisions. The detail around virtual academy, it just wasn't there because we didn't know how many kids were going to be in it and choose that option. So as that data kind of comes out, we'll be able to, better articulate answers to those questions for those students. I think the only caveat I would put around, we have not and do not anticipate going with, a canned program, an Apex Learning or something that other schools have done that. We will continue to dedicate staff to our virtual students. We believe that's very important.
Okay, moving on to Gurney. There has been a lot of concern expressed by parents about the possibility that teachers or class rosters may need to change. Bob, can you talk a little bit as to why that might be the case and what considerations are being given to whether or not a child has to change a teacher?
Yeah, and again, jump in, Jen. Obviously, our model is built right now on the number of students we have in the virtual environment. If we have a lot of those students jump over and say they want to come in, we're going to have to add in-person sections, and that may impact the teachers' that ability to obviously continue to teach virtually. We would do everything we can to limit those changes and impact on kids. But that is a reality. It's one we've known about for a long time, that if we transition, there's going to be a shift in students, which is also going to, the domino effect is there's a shift in staff.
I would just add to that too, that the Gurney staff is well aware of, the concerns for parents and for kids when having to switch a teacher. We see it happen, just in a regular year when a teacher goes out on maternity leave, potentially students having to adjust to a new teacher. So we're going to do everything we can to minimize those changes for everybody. And not to sound like a broken record, but once we have those numbers, we'll be able to give you guys a little bit more guidance on the degree to which that needs to happen. But it's definitely our goal to, create as smooth of a transition for every student, which hopefully means minimizing the number of changes we have to make. Okay, let me jump to kind of talking just in general about the change. What specific health metrics are being used to determine whether or not the school will return to full in-person instruction?
So I just walk through all of those metrics and share. They're all on our dashboard and all the data is available. Now I think one of the questions or one of the emails I got was, why at this time? So, my answer to that is what we have seen the first 4 weeks has been an improvement in the data. The things that we did not know about, procurement of PPE, implementation of safety protocols, we do now know about. And it makes sense due to that information to go through the process of preparing and doing the work to be ready to move to all in. Doesn't mean we're ready to announce an all in approach. I think we need to see more of that data over time. So that's really behind the why. And if people, want to go through each one of those, I said this to staff, any one of those could drive us either way. So if we have an outbreak in a building where it impacts our staff to a point where we have so many people either out because they're sick or quarantined and we can't subfill them, we're going to be pushed into a remote environment. So those components can work kind of independently and drive us into a position. I already gave the example of if we see escalation in the counties, both Geauga and Cuyahoga, that push into red and to purple, that would cause to shift or slow down. So a tick up in the data, even if we're prepared, that's great that we're prepared. It would just mean we push that data out a little further.
Has any thought been given to only having some schools, such as Gurney and the intermediate school, go full-time, while others, like the middle school and high school, stay in a hybrid model?
We have had conversation about, could we bring certain buildings back earlier or later? I think we see there's a kind of interdependence with families, especially if you have older kids, and being consistent with the younger model and to help with childcare purposes. So we have not pursued any of those options. Again, I want to leave the door open for the work that we need to do with teachers and administrative teams at the building before we make any kind of final commitments on schedule. But we have not, I guess, gone down the road of dividing the district in terms of the models.
Okay, the next, I'm going to combine two questions for you. One talks about why we have to decide now for something that may not happen for, a month or more. And I think you spoke to that a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about why we would be asking parents to commit for the rest of the year? Why we're not going to possibly give the option to switch models multiple times?
Well, I think we're having conversations about the why that's so difficult. I mean, potentially changing teachers, changing staff members. It's not best for kids, and it's certainly not best for what we want to do. So we want to bring continuity as much as we can. We've already made the decision once we flip, or if we flip from into a all-in model, we would not be returning to hybrid at any point. It is just too many things that have to change, rerunning of scheduling, putting it in our student information system for attendance purposes. There's way too much to kind of wind that back. So when we make that commitment, the commitment is going to be there for the remainder of the year that those are the two models we're going to be able to offer.
And then you just answered the most recent question that came in, which speaks to whether or not Chagrin Virtual Academy would go away if everything was looking good late winter, early spring in terms of COVID.
Yeah, I mean, I would love for that to be the case. And, I know we're asking to commit to a year. I think I ended my letter today saying we're as firm as you can be in the COVID environment. If, there's a vaccine pervasive, there's, no need for it, and it doesn't make sense. I'd love to get every kid here all the time and doing all the things that are so special about our school district. So we're kind of operating that we're going to have this with us. And right now, we're going to have this with us for the entire year. If that changes, I think we all would celebrate that.
And let me take a quick glance. How are we going to support the social and emotional needs of virtual students who may be uprooted from friends and teachers that they've been with since the beginning of the year?
Well, I mean, one, we're going to do everything we can to limit that impact. Transitions like this happen, as you've already pointed out, Jen, with different leaves and things come up, and we would rebuild and create those relationships. The other piece is that if there is a transition, I'm very confident in our staff working collaboratively to ensure the social emotional supports in that transition take place. So it's not ideal. We would do everything we could to limit that, but in those situations, in those circumstances, we'll do what we need to do to make sure students are successful.
And I have one last question for you. Will before and after school care be provided for K through 5 once we return to an all-in model? So I'm thinking maybe like the YMCA program.
I haven't even considered that, quite honestly, or talked to the why we're not currently engaged in that. I think part of that decision will be determined by the facility setup necessary to bring all students in terms of cafeteria and gymnasium. So once I understand that, I will be able to respond specifically to that. I have a feeling it would be very difficult to make that happen. But again, let's wait until we know exactly what's necessary at the building level.
That is it for questions.
Okay. So we certainly appreciate everything, the ongoing support of all of our parents. I think we all can relate to these difficult decisions as we're making them as well. We did our best to extend the deadline, provide as much information as we can, but yet get the information we need so we can do the work that is necessary. So if there are further questions, feel free to reach out to building principals, reach out to myself, and we'll get you whatever answers we can. I want to thank Jen for being here, Mike Doherty, you behind that icon, for being here tonight, and Mr. O'Brien, your help over the last 2 weeks for these is very much appreciated. So thank you, sir, for stepping forward. And if that is all, we are going to get on with the evening. Go Tribe.
Go Tribe.